Alright guys, BLM here, back with a new video. In this video I'll be talking about the PS4 exclusive Marvel's Spider-Man, 2 years after its initial release. And I've mentioned this in previous videos that I plan on making a video where I rank every PS4 exclusive, and to do so I would need to play a good chunk of games. And one of those games was Spider-Man here, and I was able to play it in time for the 2-year anniversary of the game, so why not talk about it? So I first played Spider-Man a few months after it was initially released. I played it twice in a row, actually, doing a 100% completion playthrough the first time, and then following that up with a much quicker playthrough where I just did story missions. So this time when I played the game, I did a similar playthrough to that second one of just rushing through the story, but afterwards I did go back and play a few side quests, and I actually did also get to play the DLCs for the first time as well, and I'll talk about those at the end of the video. But Spider-Man is a game that I had a lot of fun with, but I've never felt like I loved it as much as many other people claim to. A lot of people talk about this game as one of the best of the generation, and I just simply don't get it. I mean, it doesn't stack up with the God of Wars, the Horizons, the Red Dead 2s, the Witcher 3s, but it is still overall a fun, well-made game that does have a few major issues that do hold it back for me. But let's start talking about the game itself, starting with the open world, which comprises of the entire borough of Manhattan, with an abundance of Marvel references throughout the world, like Avengers Tower and Rand Enterprises. Navigation around the world does feel fluid most of the times, though there are times where the game doesn't respond like I would want it to. I mean, like, for some reason, it won't let me swing when there's like clearly a building right beside me. But the actual swinging in the world feels really satisfying. You can run along walls, and it works well most of the time. I mean, when you're running horizontally, it works well. Trying to climb up, it's kind of clunky at points. The parkour system in the game is functional, but it feels to me like it's pretty much like you're running on rails. It doesn't feel as satisfying to me as the swinging, though the two systems do work pretty well together, especially after unlocking a whole bunch of the skills, especially the charge jump, which is probably the one I use the most. The open world does have a bevy of side activities, but these side activities might be my biggest complaint about the game as a whole. These side activities, for the most part, are really repetitive. There are crimes in each district that randomly appear, and there are a really limited amount of them. So when you're doing like 50 of these to 100% complete the game, it gets really tedious, especially when most of them comprise of just taking out a small group of enemies. And with them being random encounters, that also adds another level of annoyance with you having to wait for them to actually show up, which led to a lot of downtime that to me was just completely unnecessary. There are a bevy of enemy bases in the game, which each one comprises of you fighting multiple waves of enemies. And again, this felt really tedious over time. There are other like more generic collectibles in the open world, like Spider-Man's old backpacks for some reason. And you could also take pictures of landmarks. Those are pretty like kind of average, whatever, the standard open world stuff. There are also research stations and Taskmaster challenges that are slightly more varied. But even then, I found some like the Taskmaster challenges pretty mediocre, the stealth challenges in particular being really annoying, as they obviously force you to kill a group of enemies without being detected, and the detection system in this game is a bit wonky at points. But another annoying element of these side activities are that completing them gives you different types of tokens, depending on the type of activity that you just completed. And those tokens are necessary to upgrade your equipment. So through a casual playthrough of the game, you are incentivized to do them. I mean, this is something that I think is an interesting idea when we're looking at the gameplay element of it, like the fact that it does force you to do different types of side activities to upgrade your equipment, but as I said, these side activities just aren't that great. So with the game forcing you to do them, it really makes it feel like a chore. Now, the final side activity I haven't talked about yet are the radio towers that act similarly to viewpoints from Assassin's Creed, or again, any other open world game that has a mechanic that reveals the map and allows for more fast travel. Now let's talk about the combat system, which I am very mixed on. I mean, the melee combat in the game plays pretty similarly to something like a Batman Arkham. This game's combat has a greater focus on using Spider-Man's web-based attacks, obviously, which are necessary to use to take down some like the brutes in the game or some of these other enemy types. It's obviously also useful to use them to stun your enemies. You have gadgets that can be extremely helpful in combat. You never have to be too conservative with using them, as they automatically reload when you take down an enemy, so you rarely find yourself with no gadgets at your disposal. You can also use the environment to throw objects at your enemies, and I know I used that a lot on my previous playthroughs of the game, though on my more recent one, I mostly just used the triangle button, which allows you to zoom to your closest enemy, and from there, I just use melee combat to take them out pretty quickly. As I mentioned earlier, the combat does get extremely repetitive over time. While on a casual playthrough, I don't think it really bothers you that much, but when going for 100% completion and having to do a much larger amount of combat sections, the combat becomes really tedious, as most fights can be done using the same cycle moves that make most fights just feel the same and makes the game so boring at that point. Now, I forgot to mention the focus meter in the game that can be used to heal yourself, though this game isn't really that difficult, so I mean, you're not really going to be using it that much. I did end up beating this game on the ultimate difficulty during one of my playthroughs, which, I mean, if I'm someone that's beating the ultimate difficulty, I think you know this game's pretty easy. You're also allowed to equip a special ability that has its own meter that refills after every use, and I didn't find most of these abilities that helpful. Really, the one I use most of the time is the original one, the Web Blossom, which potentially allows you to take out all the enemies around you, but even then, it doesn't really work most of the time. Now, this game does also have a good chunk of RPG elements within it. I mean, there is a level system, there's a skill tree, there are a bevy of different suits that can be bought or unlocked throughout the game, and some of these are really ridiculous, like the comic book outfit, which gives Spider-Man a cel-shaded outfit that just looks hilarious in cutscenes. Now, let's talk about the actual side quests in the game, and I, for the most part, really enjoyed them. And they at least try to provide some interesting gameplay sections. That being said, though, most of them are pretty forgettable. I mean, I think really the main one that stands out to me is the Tombstone questline, which is as memorable as it is because it is of the quality of the main quest, and is one that directly ties to the events in the story, has full-formed cutscenes, as a boss battle. I mean, like, it is the most interesting of the bunch, while all the other ones just kind of faded from my mind over time. Now let's talk about the main quest line, which starts off with Spider-Man taking down Fisk, and this entire mission is pretty much a tutorial for the combat in the game, and while I obviously understand that you need to teach the player how to play the game, I did find these sections pretty annoying on the replay, because this first mission is just one tutorial after another, and it really just slowed down the pace of the mission. And after that mission, we get more tutorials showing us how the open world operates, and we obviously get the introduction to the major storylines and characters like Yuri, Mary Jane, and Otto, who's obviously going to be the main villain from so early on. I think that mixed in with the obviousness of Martin Lee's storyline, and also the E3 trailer that was shown showing the Sinister Six, made this game's narrative really predictable to me. We do work with Jefferson Davis to take down the demons, and this leads to the end of Act 1 where Jefferson is killed and we get introduced to Miles Morales. And something I should talk about here are the Miles and MJ missions, which, again, I was not expecting them to be playable characters coming into this game, but they do have their own missions. They are stealth missions, and initially on my first playthrough, I really hated these. I mean, again, the detection system is very wonky in this game, but they do get better as you move on. I mean, you do later get lures and a taser and just better ways to distract enemies, so it only gets better from this point on. There are also missions in Otto's lab that are mostly just cutscenes and puzzles. I mean, it's a change of pace from a lot of the other missions that are so combat heavy, but to be honest, I didn't find this completely necessary, as the puzzles themselves also got really repetitive, as there's really only like 2 types of puzzles. But overall, Act 1 was a solid intro to the characters and storylines, but I did find the opening act just really slow-paced, and just felt like a way for them to throw in tutorials into the game, which is obviously a necessary evil in games, but I just wish it was more fluidly introduced to the game, because everything here just felt really forced to me. Now for Act 2, which does pick up a bit, where Lee is revealed to be the villain, and we spend the entire act trying to track him down, leading to the One That Got Away quest, where I did enjoy the mixing in MJ's gameplay with Spider-Man's, and having her help Spider-Man take down and defuse the bomb, and not long after that we get probably the best mission in the game with Out of the Frying Pan, where we get introduced to Sinister Six, and it's really just a fun set piece of you fighting your way through the raft and chasing down Electro, and it's a really fun setup to the end game of the game. And also narratively, I really like the scene where Spider-Man is defeated and is getting like beaten up by the Sinister Six. I thought that was fun. And then we get to Act 3, which outside of the opening mission, which that opening mission was pretty slow and again just filled with really boring combat, The overall act is amazing. I mean, I think every mission from this point forward is great, with Spider-Man taking down each member of the Sinister Six. Start off with the fight against Electro and Vulture at the same time, and that's really great. And then you also have the same thing with Rhino and Scorpion later on. We have the Streets of Poison mission, that is your typical like hallucination style mission that almost every major game does. And I'm not a big fan of these style of missions. I don't like the abstract nature of these, but I actually think this one's pretty solid, because at least it leads us to some pretty fun platforming bits. We do get the final missions for both Miles and MJ, which both of them are pretty strong. I mean, Miles is him running away from Rhino, and I really like how dynamic the level felt, where like Rhino can just really come running in there, ramming into things at any moment. And MJ's involves her sneaking into Osborn's apartment, which I found that mission pretty fun, as you could just walk around his apartment looking at different items and learning more about MJ, Peter, and Harry's childhood. I thought that was pretty fun as well. After that, we do get the final two missions in the game, the final two boss battles in the game with Lee and Otto. And these were fine for me. I mean, the Lee one is like kind of your typical boss battle fare. It's kind of just your standard fight. But the Otto one on the replay was just so ridiculously easy, as you could just spam your webs and just easily take him down. But after these boss battles, we do get to the ending of the game, obviously, where we have the Aunt May death scene, which, I'll be honest, I never cared for it. Even the first time I played the game, I just didn't care. And I feel like, to me, that's the biggest issue with the narrative as a whole. It's just I never really cared about what was going on in the story. I mean, yes, the missions were fun. They had these super villains. It was fun to take them down. But like the overall narrative that was going on, it's like, it's so blah to me. Again, like, I mean, I love this back third of the game, but it was never because of anything that the game was doing narratively. But the game does end with some interesting storylines for future games, with Miles revealing to Peter that he has superpowers, which, I mean, I'll talk about a bit later. And also the Osborn scene where he reveals that Harry is being kept in a tank, and that seeming to be a pretty major storyline for the sequel. But again, overall, the main story I do find pretty underwhelming. But that's not because of the performances. I do think the performances in the game are pretty strong. I think Yuri Lowenthal, who plays Peter Parker, I think he does a really good job at mixing like the human side of Peter while also adding in the comedic nature of the Spider-Man character. I think MJ is well performed here by Laura Bailey, and I did like how they handled her character by making her more of a part of the action at certain points in the story. I liked how Yuri was portrayed here, and I liked Spider-Man's banter with her. I thought Lee and Otto were decent villains. I mean, the entire cast was okay, and I think the characters here seem to be a faithful portrayal to what I expected them to be. So while I had my disappointments with the game and the narrative as a whole, I do feel like this was a great first step to making a potentially perfect Spider-Man game in the future. So that's it for the main game. Let's talk about the DLCs, which, again, I played for the first time, and I know there was some controversy when it initially came out for its lack of quality, and for me, I just found them to be okay. I mean, it felt like a pseudo sequel to the main game, taking place after obviously the game and having minor additions to the gameplay. There are new enemy types and new side activities that were, to be honest, just as boring as the original game. Though they did add a couple new types of missions, but overall they were still extremely lacking. I did like the appearance of Black Cat in the heist. Her character was kind of generic, but I did like the effect it had on Peter and MJ's relationship, even though there were a bevy of dumb plot points in that chapter. I found Turf Wars pretty slow, where outside of learning more about Yuri's background, I felt like this episode did absolutely nothing. I love how, like, despite having a big boss battle with Hammerhead and Yuri even shooting him at close range, he still somehow survives. And then for Silver Lining, which I thought was pretty solid. I mean, I liked the dynamic between Peter and Silver Sable. It did also have some interesting side quests. The final boss battle was pretty fun as well, but overall this DLC just felt like a cheap reskin of the original game with some minor improvements. And not really even improvements, just like really just additions. They just added stuff for the sake of adding stuff, and I also just found it weird that it took place after the main story, which, while cool, it's cool that's like a pseudo sequel. This also leads to a few disappointments with, like, obviously the follow-up to the Miles Morales storyline, where in the main game we have the setup thinking that, oh, in the sequel we're going to see Peter train Miles, but a lot of that storyline gets wasted here in this DLC, where we have like Miles just keep on begging Peter to train him, and then we get a cutscene at the end showing their first training. It's like, that felt like a waste of a storyline. Like, why wasn't that just in the sequel? So overall, the DLCs, I felt like narratively they were getting kind of pointless. Gameplay wise, they were kind of redundant. That doesn't mean I didn't have fun while playing them. I just felt like they were just really unnecessary and definitely could have been better. But those are my opinions on Marvel's Spider-Man as a whole, 2 years after its initial release. Again, it's a game that I do enjoy. I mean, I wouldn't have 100% completed it if I didn't enjoy it. I wouldn't have 100% completed the DLCs if I didn't enjoy them, and platinumed the game for like no real reason. So I mean, I did enjoy this game, but it is filled with a bevy of tedious side activities and a narrative that I never really felt attached to outside of the fact that it had Spider-Man characters. But to be honest, I think my opinion of the game did go slightly up after my latest replay, so we'll have to see where it lands on my PS4 exclusive ranking. That should be coming out sometime next month, but don't really count on that. But those are my opinions on Spider-Man. So for now, thank you for watching.